Thank you for coming today. Today we have our one and only Ethan Lang doing a presentation, different tips and tricks. We'll see what he's got up his sleeve today. Just gonna do some introductions, vet to viz story, introduce Ethan, and then just go along the schedule. All right, so I'm Abe, former Marine financial analyst at Nova Southeastern University. Currently mostly doing my work in SQL and Power BI, but I still dabble in Tableau most of the time. If the other colleagues, Tim, Lou, Ethan, or Tim, Lou, you guys want to introduce yourselves? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Tim, former Air Force and Air National Guard. I worked for VA for a while, and now I work for the FAA in the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, doing strategic planning and performance measures. And I've been using Tableau for like 7 years. So, Lou?
Yeah, happy Earth Day, everyone. Thanks for joining us wherever you're calling from. So Lula Wangzai, former Marine, aviation, logistic, currently working in the financial service field as a product manager. So been involved with Tableau in and out for the past 10 years as far as the application itself. So I'm happy everybody's joined us. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and so forth. Other than that, you guys are in for a treat. I really mean that. So.
All right. So thanks, Lou. Thanks, Tim. So here we got the vet to viz story, and what this is like, however you got from the military, whether you're a veteran or not, from the day you got out, you're kind of like a couple minutes of your story to how you got into working with data. So any volunteers from the crowd, we'd be happy to hear from somebody.
Also, if you're not a vet, I don't know if you mentioned that. If you're not a vet, feel free to say how you're connected to the community and how you got into data.
I'll go ahead and start off. My name is Philip Pinkney. I actually work at the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center. My father's a veteran, so got involved with data just recently as a program analyst in the GPM office at DC. So just looking forward to learning more. We use Pyramid, looking to learn Tableau and some SQL, along with many other things. But yeah, it's a lot to take in. So I'm looking forward to today.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else? Would you do about probably 2 more?
I'll go. My name is Tito Bogus, and I was in the Air Force for 20 years, and so I'm retired Air Force. Retired in 2015, and my last job in the Air Force was like a super low tech, like reporting analyst type job, using Cognos, Excel, and PowerPoint. And so I didn't want to, when I retired, I didn't want to go back to working on airplanes. And I was like, I need to find an office job. And I really liked it. So I was like, well, let me find something like this on the outside. So when I retired, I moved up to Nashville, and I got into like data, working with Alteryx and Tableau. It was my very first civilian job, is Alteryx and Tableau. Now I work for Data Meeting. I'm a consultant and a trainer. I'm an Alteryx trainer. And so I don't use Tableau as much, but I still use it. So
awesome. Thank you for sharing. And let's do one more. Crickets.
Yeah, I'll go if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was an uncomfortable silence there. I figured I gotta bail out my boy, but yeah, it's pretty cool that we got 2 people jump in right off the bat. That's probably above average for us. But yeah, so I'm Al Bellamy. I was the featured speaker guest, whatever, on the show a couple of months ago. But yeah, I was 23 years in the Marine Corps, and now I'm out. I'm working in marketing analytics. And yeah, so I love, I'm a newly converted Alteryx dude, and yeah, kind of borderline obsessed with it, as Abe will attest. I'm constantly boring him by talking about it. So Yeah, work remotely out of North Carolina. My company is headquartered out of New York. And so, yeah, just this morning I taught a class on how to pass the core certification. So yeah, got Ultrix on the brain pretty much all the time.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Albert, and everyone for sharing. So I'm going to introduce our guest of honor. We all know him. We all love him. Ethan Lang, who I actually just met for the first time in Kansas City this past weekend. He took me to a great barbecue spot. So thanks again for that. You got, what was it? Jack Stack?
Jack Stack Barbecue. It's one of the best in Kansas City.
Yeah, if you're ever there, please stop by. You won't regret it. So Ethan works at Playfair. He's going to show us some couple of tips and tricks, and I'll pass it off to you, Ethan. Thanks for stepping in.
Cool. Yeah, appreciate that, Abe. Let me go ahead and share. And it sounded like we had several kind of newer people getting involved in data. That's awesome. I think a lot of this will resonate with you, and a lot of the content I have on here as well will also resonate with veteran users of the tool as well. So looking forward to presenting this. Really, Abe alluded to it earlier, but before we even get started, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. I know your time is pretty valuable. Obviously, it's the most valuable resource we have, right? So thank you for joining us today and hearing what we have to say. Like I said, I'm looking forward to presenting this, and hopefully you can get some value and take something away and apply it to your everyday. So with that said, let's jump in. I'll touch a little bit about myself real quick. I'm the Associate Director of Analytics Engineering at Playfair Data. We're a consulting company, so we consult with clients all over the world, really, ranging from nonprofit organizations to Fortune 100 companies. So it's really exciting. I love what I do. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm obviously a co-lead of this TUG, so the Veterans Advocacy TUG. Like many of you know, I'm a veteran myself. I was in the Army, military police. And when I got out, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. The only thing I knew that I didn't want to do was work as a police. So I went to college and started getting involved in tech. And that kind of led me, through a statistics class. I had a really great professor, got me interested in this stuff. And here I am working data to this day. So love what I do. It's an amazing field to be in. Lastly, I'm part of the Tableau Speaker Bureau. Really, that's just a fancy way to say I'm on some list that Tableau has. They can pull my name from that list to come speak at events like this, like the Tableau user groups, or speak at the conferences. Back in 2020, I had the opportunity to speak at the 2020 virtual conference. So that was a really cool experience. Yeah, that was awesome. I'm also going to be at this year's conference. So if there's anyone in the audience that's going to be attending live to the Tableau conference, definitely let me know. Let's network and connect while we're out there. I think from the leaders, me and Tim are going to be there. Lou, Abe, I don't think you guys are going, right? In person?
Oh, it's too expensive for me.
That, and I'll be moving to Kansas City around, so I can't justify a trip to Vegas.
True. All right, yeah. So if you guys are going to be out there, looking forward to meeting up. Definitely hit us up and let us know. So the idea I have to present today, if you're using Tableau, this is something you probably use and go through every day, kind of unbeknownst to you. But there's this kind of core concept within data visualization and graphics and stuff called the layering graphics, or the components of layered graphics. And it's really this process on how we're creating those data visualizations within the tool. So there's 6 layers or 6 components to this layered graphics approach. So the first layer is the data layer, right? So if we're familiar with Tableau, the moment you open up the tool, the first thing it asks us to do is connect to some data. Tableau does a really good job on the data connections. There's tons of different data connections that Tableau can make. So this layer, obviously, it's just connecting to data. The next layer is where you're choosing your mark type. And when I say mark type, it's really the chart type that you want to use to encode the mark on your view. So this could be a line chart or a bar chart, anything like that. Next would be aesthetics. So if we're thinking Tableau, once we open up the tool, connect the data, we can create a bar chart. And from there, we can add color to it, maybe change the size, and add some aesthetic components to our charts. The fourth layer is filtering and subplotting. There's actually a ton of different kinds of filters in Tableau, and we'll touch on all of those today when we get to this layer in detail. And then subplotting is more or less just creating some sort of comparison view for your users where they can do a comparison side by side. The fifth layer is statistics. So this is where we can really start to apply some advanced techniques and get into more predictive or prescriptive type analytics. Again, Tableau makes this extremely easy for us, even to incorporate some of these more advanced models within our view. So we'll touch on statistics in the analytics pane today as well. And last is theme. So theme is really where we're going to take everything we've just built, this awesome data visualization, and we're going to wrap it in some sort of architecture that's really going to drive, that professional polish and drive adoption of your tools. So I'll touch on that again today as well. So just a little history behind this idea. There's plenty of really smart people out there. I didn't come up with this idea. This is just something that's interested me, and I've done some research on it. But the most recent kind of reference to this idea is from a book in a library that was written by Hadley Wickham. This is a famous library in R code. If you're familiar with R code, it's a programming language primarily used in the statistical world. But ggplot2 is a library you can download for that coding language, and it helps you, it kind of guides you through building out data visualizations using code. So this library relies heavily on this layered graphics approach. If you're coding a data visualization manually using any kind of coding language, it's very strict and rigid. You're telling it manually in a line of code, I'm connecting to this data, and you're telling it what chart type you want. You're telling it what aesthetics to add, going all the way through each of one of these layers, if you will. But Hadley Wickham, he actually picked up this idea from another book that was authored by Leland Wickelson. So this book is called The Grammar of Graphics, and he goes into this technique in thorough detail. Hadley Wickham actually took kind of the learnings that he took from Leland Wickelson's The Grammar of Graphics and applied that when he built out this library for R code. And you can kind of see that too, because he names the library ggplot2, which stands for the Grammar of Graphics Plotting version 2 for that. That's what the library's name is. But this idea has been around for decades. It actually goes all the way back to when we first started using computers to visualize data. Again, a lot of really smart people got together and they started to come up with these ideas. And like I mentioned earlier, when you're coding data visualization manually, you do have to, it's a step-by-step process. We have to tell it which data to connect to. We have to create that chart type first before we can apply aesthetics to it. Once we have that chart type selected, then we can apply statistics to it. So it is kind of a step-by-step process. And what I've really found fascinating is in coding, you're doing all that very manually, but Tableau has really perfected this technique and applied it within their own software. So like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of unbeknownst to us, but as we go through and we're building our data visualizations, Tableau is kind of walking us through each of these layers and kind of guiding us through the software. So it's kind of cool how they've connected the dots here. But enough of the history lesson, let's dive into the content. So we'll touch on each of these layers individually. So the first layer is data. And data is pretty self-explanatory, right? We open up Tableau, it asks us to connect to something, maybe that's a flat file, maybe that's, some sort of cloud service. There's tons of different data connections. However, there are some core concepts within this data layer that I want to make sure you guys understand to get the most out of Tableau. The first core concept is this idea of unstructured data versus structured data. So I think we're all familiar with something that looks like this report, right? Unstructured data would kind of have, just to give you an example, dates across the top, maybe your measures and dimensions to the left side. It's going to have subtotals and all kinds of running totals and sums going on throughout the whole sheet. That's what we would consider unstructured. When we kind of plug in data to an Excel sheet, it just makes sense for us. Our brains are kind of built to read left to right. So this is how we'll encode data when we do it manually in Excel. But for a computer to kind of pick up on that data, it really needs to be in a structured format. And I'll show you the difference. A structured format is going to be a little bit different, right? It's going to have all those dates pivoted, and now they're going to be represented by a single column. We're not going to have any subtotals or anything like that going on in our data set or the structured data set. We're going to take care of all those subtotals and stuff once we get it into the tool. We don't want that in our data. So this is really what a structured data set would look like. I see, Abe, you're raising your hand. You got a question, or is there a question in the audience?
Yeah, so this is like considered like, I guess in R, this is like tidy, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So structured data typically will be, you'll hear it as, a structured data source, or it's also referred to as a tidy data source. I think it picks up that name. There's another library in R called tidyr, and that's another great library that's used to structure data. So yeah, any other questions out there? All right, I'll keep going. So structured data kind of follows these 3 rules of thumb. The first rule of thumb is that every column is going to be represented by a unique variable. So you can see here in my simple example, I have name, age, and gender. Those are the columns. Then the second rule of thumb is that every row would be represented by a unique observation. So I have 4 rows in my data. I have a unique observation for Anna, Mark, Max, and Carol. So we can see each of those are represented by a unique row. In our structured data source, we wouldn't want to encode Anna twice in our data, right? That's going to cause duplications. It's going to lead to us having to clean the data. And that kind of defeats the purpose of it being structured, right? Once it's structured, we shouldn't have to take an extra step to clean stuff out. So each row would be represented by a unique observation. And then third, everything in your data, all the cells should be represented with a value, right? We don't want to have any NAs or nulls within our data set, especially when we start getting into some of those more advanced layers like statistics. Once we start applying statistical modeling to our data, a lot of times those NAs and nulls, they might even get excluded from the statistical model, right? So we don't want to have that stuff in our structured data set. We want to handle that first before we start loading and connecting to it. So that's the third rule of thumb. So we've already alluded to some of those programs that I'm going to mention, but there's tons of them out there where you can take your unstructured data, bring it into a program and structure it, and then outsource it to something else. So there's plenty of programs out there. Some that are more popular would be things like Alteryx. I heard Al and some others talking about it. It's a really, really powerful tool that's built for, creating data structures and structuring your data and outputting them, either publishing them to a data warehouse or data mart or something like that. There's Tableau Prep. Tableau Prep comes free with a creator license. It's another great tool that you can use to kind of drag and drop and clean up your data. And then there's also ways you can clean your data and structure it using R or Python or SQL. And really the idea, again, is to take data from an unstructured source. Say it's a data lake. You're grabbing all this unstructured data, you're bringing it in, you're structuring it using kind of these 3 rules of thumb as your North Star, and then you're outputting it to some place where the end user can connect to it and really take advantage of the data. This could be, data warehouse or data mart. Maybe you're just simply outputting it to a hyper or publishing it to Tableau server or an Excel file, anything really. All right, the second kind of core concept within this data layer is this idea between measures and dimensions and how they're related to one another. So a measure is typically defined as a numeric quantitative value that can be measured in some way. So these would be things like sales or maybe some aggregation, like the sum of sales. Dimensions, however, are qualitative fields that will describe your measures. So to give you an example of how they're related, let's just say I made $2 million in sales. So I might be feeling really good about that, right? Like $2 million is quite a bit of money. But let's say I drag in my date dimension and I describe that measure of 2 million, and I find that I made $1.5 million last year, and this year I've only made $500,000. I might not be feeling very good about that. We want to start diving into the data at that point and figuring out what happened between last year and this year that's causing such a big discrepancy. So that's how the data, the dimensions and measures are related. Also, one other thing I wanted to touch on. Measures are typically in Tableau encoded with a called a green pill. So you'll see those on the left side of your screen is represented in this green, and we call that the pill. Dimensions are typically represented with a blue pill. And this isn't to be, misrepresented by the matrix. It's not the red pill and the blue pill. This is the green pill and the blue pill. So I do want to make that pretty clear. So as I go through this presentation, I'm going to briefly show you guys this workbook I've created where we're toggling on each layer as we go. So this takes us to the end of the first layer, which is the data layer. In our view here, we can see I've toggled on that first layer. You can see that layer kind of filled in and that toggle goes to red, but I've done nothing else. I've only connected to my data set. So at this point, we just have a blank slate or a blank view. And as we go through the presentation, we'll kind of fill those in with the different layers as we go. So you can see how they're all connected. So the second layer is choosing your mark type. And when I say mark type, I really mean what chart type do you want to use to visualize your data? This could be a bar chart or a line chart. And again, Tableau makes this extremely easy, right? Anyone can connect to data and simply drag in a few marks onto the view or measures and dimensions, and Tableau will automatically encode some sort of data visualization for you. So you'll either end up with a scatter plot or a bar chart, maybe a line chart. It just depends on the measures and dimensions that you drag into the view. But Tableau does that for you automatically. It's fantastic. However, there are ways that you can tell Tableau how you want to encode your marks manually. One way would be from the marks card. There's a drop-down. You can click that drop-down and choose a mark type. So you could choose a line chart or area, maybe a bar, and you can tell Tableau that's how you want to encode the view. Another great way that another great thing that Tableau has done is included the Show Me tab. So to the top right of your screen, there's a little toggle that says Show Me. And Tableau's done extensive research on different types of data and different types of measures and dimensions used in tandem. And they've already kind of figured out what's the best chart type to display what you have in the view. So if you have a couple measures and a dimension on the view, if you click the Show Me tab, Tableau will tell you what's the recommended chart type from Tableau that would best represent that data. So you'll see here line charts and area charts, box plots, pie charts, data tables, bar charts, and so on. So this is a really easy way to choose and kind of encode your marks on the view. However, Tableau is also very flexible and it's an extremely robust tool. We can really create, it's almost limitless what you can create using Tableau. This resource out there is in Tableau Public. It was authored by Kevin Flaherledge, and it's something that I'll go to occasionally to look for inspiration on different projects I'm working on. But it's a great resource because you can go through here and see some more advanced chart types, stuff that's just not out of the box with Tableau. So you can go to this resource and actually, I think I have it pulled up. Let's go through it together. So if you come to this Tableau Public, what it allows you to do, there's 100 different chart types in here. And you could scroll through here, and if you see one that catches your eye, and maybe you want to either, learn how to create that chart type to get it under your own portfolio, maybe incorporate it to your work. Maybe you're just looking to upskill and you're looking for something fun to do. You can go through this catalog and choose one. So if I wanted to learn how to make, I don't even know how to pronounce that, notabilia chart, I can simply click on this chart type and it's going to open up that workbook within Tableau Public. From here, I can go to the top right now and I can download this workbook and I can kind of re-engineer what this author has done to create this really unique chart type. So this is a great resource to go through, kind of find stuff for inspiration, stuff that stands out to you, and then go through and kind of re-engineer how that author did it. Another great resource out there, and interestingly enough, go back to my slides here.
Hey, Ethan, can you drop these in the chat whenever you get a chance?
Sure. Or if one of you guys can do that, that'd be fantastic as well.
I'll do it. I was just
Tim, you got
it. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Another great resource out there is this one called The Visual Vocabulary by Andy Kriebel. So he does a slightly different approach than Kevin. So what Kevin does is he kind of presents to you a chart type, and you can go through there, download it, and re-engineer it. The way Andy Kriebel has designed his tool is it's like a catalog where it will go through a use case. So maybe my use case is I want the best chart type that would visualize correlation in data. In Andy Kriebel's resource, there'll be an option that says correlation. You can simply click that and it will display which chart types would be best used for that situation. So another great resource that I'll go to for inspiration or guidance when you're kind of making your decision on how you want to encode your marks.
Does it explain like
Go ahead.
why like this chart is like why this type of specific chart is good for whatever we're trying to show?
Let's see. I'm not sure if it goes into that much detail. Let's
Yeah,
pull
like
it up.
like why it's good to use a bar chart for whatever reason. Sorry to interrupt too. Yeah.
No, these are great questions. I'm glad you said. And this will also make it a little bit more clear on what I mean. So Andy Kriebel's tool, it has all of these different kinds of use cases. So again, going back to my correlation, he kind of describes what it means. And then if you click on any of these, it's going to show you the different chart types that would best represent correlation. And it looks like he does give kind of a brief explanation on why each one of these chart types was used. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, that's kind of the difference between the visual vocabulary from Andy Kriebel. It's kind of like a guidance by your use case. Whereas this, it's kind of more, I would say this is for inspiration. So if I come through here and I'm like, man, that arc diagram looks super cool, I can click that and kind of figure out what that author did to create that chart type. And then maybe I can re-engineer it and make it, add in my own data once I've kind of figured out what was going on. Let's see, let me hop back over. All right. So that brings us to the end of that second layer, choosing your mark type. And we can see, going back to our little view here, I've toggled on that second layer and we can see the data has been encoded in the view now. I have close price on my y-axis, the day of closing on my x-axis, and I've chosen a line chart to encode the marks on my view. So we can see that kind of come to life here. So the third layer is aesthetics. Aesthetics, to me, this is probably one of the most powerful layers that we can touch on. Like I said, Tableau makes it extremely easy for anyone to kind of jump into the tool, connect to some data, and build a bar chart. Like literally anyone can do that in probably 10 minutes the first time they've opened the tool. It's really easy. But from our perspective as analysts or Tableau engineers, really this is where you can start flexing your chops and showing people, the value of data and kind of drawing out those insights. And it's really in this aesthetics layer where you can start to do that. And this takes a lot of skill and finesse as well. Like I said, anyone can create a bar chart, but you have to know what you're doing really to start nailing this and perfecting this layer. So the first aesthetic you can add in Tableau is color. And color to me is one of the most powerful aesthetics you can add to a view. If you want to draw someone's attention to the particular mark on the view, color is one of the best ways to do that. So if you encoded that mark with a different color than the others, it's going to really draw your audience attention to that specific mark. Within the color aesthetic, we also have some other options. We can play around with transparency or the opacity of those views or those marks in our view. And this is a great way to kind of reduce that cognitive load. If we have a lot of really bright colors, people can, maybe that's going to draw a little bit too much away from the action or the insight that you're trying to complete. So adding in some transparency is going to lighten that cognitive load. It's a great way to kind of add that professional polish to the view as well. We can also add things like borders to our marks. So if we were working with a scatter plot, you can add a border here from the effects under the color marks card. And that's going to kind of clean it up a little bit, make each one of those views very unique, each one of those marks look very unique in your view. Once we start adding in borders, we have also the option to change the line type. So we can change from a solid line or a dashed. So we have the ability to do that as well. The next aesthetic that is also extremely powerful is shape. Again, just like color, if you encoded a mark in your view with unique shape different than the others, it's going to really draw your audience's attention to that. So it's a great way to start incorporating or drawing that insight out. Another great thing with shape is you can load in custom shapes. So from Tableau, you can go into the back end in your folders and just simply add in a new folder in your My Tableau repository, and you can add in custom shapes that you can then access directly from the tool at any given time. So it's another great way to just add in some of that professional polish and really start to drive the insight. The next aesthetic is size, and size is great when it's worked in tandem with some of those others that I've mentioned already, like color or shape. So say we encoded our view with a different shape than the other marks in the view. If I size that shape differently as well, again, it's just going to continually add that context and drive that insight. You can also use shape to, maybe you have a map and you can use shape to encode like double encoding within your view. So maybe you've colored the states, or maybe it's a mark on the view by color. You can then change it and encode size with something else. So now you kind of have a double encoding, so you can draw more context up. My only complaint with size is you're just left with that little slider bar to change your size. So it only connects like right there in the middle. That tick mark, if we're looking at the left side of my screen, that's the only place where you really get like that reference. I wish there was something a little bit more precise. So if anyone in the audience knows how we can get that going, or if there's a way to get a little bit more precise measurement on size, I'd definitely be all ears to hear on that.
Ethan.
Yeah.
So this has been an absolutely amazing talk on the fundamentals and background of data visualization. But so there are a couple other size features that you should be aware of in Tableau. So for one is that you can go into edit size to change the dynamics from 0 to whatever your highest measure is, and make it an exponential scale, make it a continuous scale, change 0 up so that things are a little closer. But one I always want to mention in sizing is the from 0 sizing. In your professional settings, a lot of the sizing that you will use is related to a goal. So you can set whatever your goal metric is as 0, and then things get bigger or smaller the way how far they are away as an absolute value, as a negative or a positive from that 0 goal. The trick with sizing is that we see squares or bars in dimension much easier than we do circles, which is weird because the legend is always a circle with sizing.
Totally.
It's like the worst way to look at sizing, right? You know,
Totally.
Think about a pizza and the diameter of it, how much bigger a pizza is that only is a few inches bigger in diameter. So that's the only thing I'll add here, is that if you make sure you research, you can edit and look at the scale of your sizing, and particularly use from 0 sizing. It's crucial.
Gotcha. No, that's fantastic. I love that. Thanks, Will, for adding that. That's great. All right, another aesthetic. This one often gets overlooked, but it's an aesthetic all the same. And that's your axes. So you can edit your axes within the view by simply right-clicking on any axes, and there'll be an option that says Edit Axis. That's going to give you this menu here that we can see on the left side of my screen. You can set things like the range. So you can set the range of your axes. You can also start playing around with the scale. So you can reverse the scale or add some sort of logarithmic function to it if you wanted to kind of normalize your data for any reason. You can also start to go through and add in axes titles. So again, this is a great way to just very subtly just plug in some more context for your end users. You can add that main title or a subtitle. You can also, there's another tab there, tick marks. If you wanted to go through and kind of refine what tick marks are being displayed and at what range, you can do it from that menu. That's another great way to kind of reduce that data to ink ratio. So maybe we had 100 tick marks, not needed. Well, maybe let's change that to 5, something like that, just to give the users enough reference, but not that precise where we have every kind of measure tick marked in our view. These last four, I'm just going to briefly touch on. Some of them are a little bit more self-explanatory than others. So I'll start with label. Label, obviously, we're just adding labels to the marks in our view. So if you drop anything on label, it will add that to as a mark or a label on your view. The thing with label, you can also click on that card within the marks card, and there'll be other options where maybe we want to encode labels on, maybe it's just the min and max value. Maybe we don't want, 365 labels on every single mark in our view. So we can make those adjustments directly from the labels marks card. The next one is detail. So detail, if you drop anything onto the details marks card, what it's going to do is change the level of detail in your view. So if we had a scatter plot that had, let's say, the sum of sales and the sum of profit, if I added customer name to detail, it would change the level of aggregation in that view to show me the sum and profit for every customer. So now I would have a mark for each customer within my data set. The next one is tooltip. And tooltip is another great aesthetic that you can add to your view that continually just drives context for your end user, right? You can encode different, say we didn't want to have a label on every mark in the view. Now we can just encode what that label was within our tooltip. So if the user hovers over, it'll show you the sales and profit, maybe the customer name within that tooltip. Another great tip, I actually picked this up on the last talk we had with Don Harrington. If you guys missed that one, definitely check it out on the recording. It was, or actually we didn't record that one, dang it. But it was great. One of the tips she gave us though was changing that default tooltip to read like a sentence. So by default, Tableau will just say, sales is this, profit is that, and that's your tooltip label. If we scratch that out and made it read like a sentence, it would say something like, on this day, whatever mark that is, we made X many sales. That's just a great way to just, lighten it up on your user. It just tells them very easily what's going on that mark. So I thought that was a great tip. Also within the tooltip marks card, you can add things like invis and tooltips. Again, just driving that context and drilling into another layer in your data very easily. You can add a viz right within your tooltip so the end users can see things. Maybe it's the top 10 products that customer bought. They'd be able to hover over a mark and it would visually show you that within another viz in the tooltip. And then lastly is angle. And angles oftenly kind of referenced with a pie chart. Once we start getting into more advanced chart types, you might use angle more often than you would normally. Once we start getting into some of those more advanced chart types, you'll need to encode an angle onto your view to kind of get that curvature on some of the lines and things like that, and add those effects. So that's why I incorporated in here. It is an aesthetic that you can add to the marks on your view. Okay, so going back to our workbook here, I've toggled on that third layer and we can see I've added color into our view. And what this represents is if the close price was greater than the prior day, it's encoded with green. If the close price was less than the prior day, it's encoded red. So we can see the ups and downs there on my line chart. The next layer is filtering. And I mentioned earlier, there's actually a lot of different filters in Tableau. If we look at the left side of my screen here, this is the order of operations that Tableau would process your data. And we can see all of the things that it's processing as it goes, it reads from top to bottom, being processed first at the top and then going to the last process down. If we look at this menu or the order of operations, we could see there's clearly a lot of different filters in here. So let's go through each of one of those one at a time, and I'll explain how they all kind of work in tandem. So the first two filters that Tableau will process is called an extract filter and a data source filter. If we look at the right side of my view here, this is the data source tab within the Tableau authoring interface. So if you click that data source tab, the bottom left of your screen, you'll find a menu that looks very similar to this. This is where we would make our data connections and change the physical and relational layers within Tableau. So if we create a filter here, if we look at the top right of that, my screenshot to the right of my screen, we'll see an option that says filters, and in blue text, it will say add. If we click add and we add a filter to a live connection, that's a data source filter. If we add a filter to an extract, it's an extract filter. And the advantage here is because that's the first thing that Tableau processes when you open up your workbook, that data is going to get filtered out first, right? So let's say I was working with a very large data set, let's say 50 million rows of data, and I added in an extract filter to my data to filter it down to maybe 500,000 rows. That's the most relevant data that I wanted to pull into my view. The advantage there is now, as we start loading in and the users kind of clicking through and making adjustments within the dashboard, it's only processing those calculations on 500,000 rows rather than 50 million. So you might see some speed optimization from that simple change. The next filter we'll touch on is a context filter. So a context filter gets processed right after the data source and extract filters. And if we look at the right hand of my screen here, we can actually see in the filter shelf, I have two filters, one for category, one for subcategory. The top one for category that's encoded with a gray pill, that is a context filter. To add a context filter, you would add a dimension filter, just like normal. And then if you right click on that dimension filter, you'll have the option to add it to context within its sub menu. Once you add it to context, it's going to get processed first. And to kind of explain how this works, a context filter, and set it up as an example. For our context filter, I've added category as my context filter. I've added subcategory as my dimension filter. And what this gives me is this really cool kind of cascading effect, where that context filter is getting processed first and it's cascading down into my dimension filter. So let's just say for my category, I filtered it to technology. Now what's going to happen is everything in my subcategory filter is going to be the subcategories only for the technology category. So it cascades down to our dimension filter. The next three filters I'll cover all at the same time. The first two are condition filters and top-end filters. And those would get added very similar to how we would add a dimension filter. So if we're thinking in Tableau, we would drag a dimension to the filter shelf, and we're going to get one of these menus to the right. We can see there's 4 tabs in that menu. There's general, wildcard, condition, and top. If I go to my condition tab and I set a condition, it's going to be a condition filter. If I go to my top in filters and set a top in filter, it's going to fall under the top in filters. If I go to the general or wildcard, typically that's going to be encoded as a dimension filter. So it actually gets processed after those other two. Again, keep that in mind that it's going to have some sort of cascading effect. So if I apply a top in filter and then a dimension filter, that dimension filter is going to get that top in filter cascade. The next filter we'll touch on is a measures filter. So if we look at the right hand of my screen, in the screenshot, I have 3 filters on the filter shelf now. One is the category context filter, represented by the gray pill. The next is a blue pill, which is a dimension filter. And then the third one is a green pill, which is a measures filter. For my measures filter, to give you guys an example of what that would be, if I add a measures filter, I can set things like, maybe I want to exclude only sales that were above $10. So everything below $10 in sales would get excluded from my view. I can do that using a measures filter. So that's how you would kind of get into that level of granularity with your filters. The next one is a table calculation filter, and it's very similar to a measures filter as far as how you would set it, except it's based on a table calculation. Something like a window average, a total, running sum, percent total, all of those are table calculations. A table calculation is also denoted with a green pill, except on the right-hand side, there's a delta symbol there. So that's how you would kind of know the difference between a table calculation. So you can see I have that fourth pill that I've added in my filter shelf with the delta symbol. That's a table calculation filter. And that's actually all the filters, I think, in Tableau. So we'll go to subplotting, and this is a very easy concept. Subplotting is where you're going to have kind of two comparison views next to each other. So on the left hand of my screen, I have my same view that I had prior, except it's filtered to stock A. On the right hand of my screen, I have the same view, except it's filtered to stock B. So now the user can kind of look at these things side by side and make some sort of comparison, or find insight or draw some sort of conclusion looking at these things side by side. So we can see maybe stock A, it's looking like it's going down. So maybe we want to buy that once it kind of hits a low. Buy it when it's low, hopefully it'll go up and we'll make some money. On the other hand, stock B is kind of going up. So we have the option, we can either buy now and hope that it continues to go up. Maybe there's something that's pushing it up. Maybe we need to look into that. Or maybe we'll wait until it kind of plateaus and comes back down and maybe buy it while it's low again. So those are the kind of conclusions and decisions you can make with a subplot. You kind of have both sets of data, you're looking at them simultaneously to make that decision. All right, so in our view, going back to our workbook, I've toggled on that fourth layer. So we can see I've added a filter in our view. So I can now filter between stock A, B, or C. But that's all I've done in our view so far for this layer. The fifth layer is statistics. And I mentioned this prior. This is a very powerful methods that you can use to apply more context or to draw insight out of your data. And Tableau makes it extremely easy for us to add some of these complex models to our data by simply dragging and dropping them into the view. So from your authoring interface at the top left, you're typically defaulted to your data pane. This is where you'll find all your measures and dimensions you can drag into the view. There's an option to toggle to another pane that's called the analytics pane. And on this tab, you'll see these options here. So you'll have a summarize section, a model section, and then there's a section called custom. I'll briefly touch on some of these and how you would add them to the view, and use cases on when I typically will use them and how. So the first two I'll touch on is the average line and the average line with 95% confidence. So if I were to drag one of these into the view, we'd be presented with this option on the left hand of our authoring interface. It's going to bring this dialog box here on the right hand of my screen, and it's where it says add a distribution band. We'll be presented with that. And really what that's saying is at what level of aggregation do we want that average calculated? So do we want the average calculated across the entire view, all the data? Do we want it calculated at individual panes or at individual cells within the view? And Tableau does a great job of kind of visually displaying how each of those aggregations would work. We also have below each of those images, two pills, one representing column and rows. So from here, we can add something to our X or Y axes by simply dragging average to one of those options beneath the image. If you wanted to add it to both, you could drag it to the image itself and it will add it to both your X and Y axes. What I love to do with the average line is I typically will add it, especially when I'm working with scatter plots. So if I have a scatter plot, if I add an average line to both my X and Y axes, now it's created a very clean quadrant within my scatter plot. So now I can start making decisions. If we're talking sales and profit, I'll typically want all of my customers to start kind of resonating towards the top right, into that quadrant where they're making the most sales and the most profit. We can also start to analyze our data. What makes up those customers in that quadrant? Why are they different from everything that's falling kind of below in this, lower left quadrant? So you can start doing more analysis and getting a little bit more in depth with what you're looking at by simply adding in these reference lines. It's a very easy way to add more context to the view. The next one I'll use occasionally is a median with 95 confidence interval. This one, it has the same options as far as the level of detail that it will calculate out that median, table, pane, or cell. And when I use median, I will typically use it in tandem with an average line. So if we're thinking about normalized data, we've all heard of this, kind of follows that bell curve. It's a very familiar term in the data world. If our data follows that normalized pattern, the median and average are typically going to line up, if not be equal, if we have perfect symmetry in our data. So when we add an average line and a median on the view at the same time, we can now have a very clear visual indicator on if our data is not normalized or if we have outliers that we need to handle before we start doing statistical modeling. So again, it's just a great way to kind of dive into your data and figure out a little bit more and get a little bit more context very easily from the analytics pane. Now we'll start going into some of the more statistical modeling. The first one I'll touch on is this trend line. And with our trend line, we're kind of presented with these 5 different types of models. We have linear, logarithmic, exponential, polynomial, and power. What I love about this is Tableau does a great job on visually representing how your data should be shaped for each of these use cases. So even if you're not very statistical savvy, you can kind of get a good idea of which model would probably work best in different situations. So if our data kind of follows this linear pattern, where it's going from left maybe to the top right, let's try a linear model and see how that performs. Our data kind of has some seasonality and kind of ups and downs. Let's try a polynomial model. Maybe that will perform better than a linear would. So those are just some like visual cues on which ones to use. From once you add that trend line in, you also have the ability to look at the underlying statistics. So if we add a trend line, you can right click on it and view what the coefficients are or the p-values and things like that. And you can start judging accuracy and making some more complex assumptions on your data. The next model I'll touch on is the forecast. So underneath the hood in Tableau, their forecasting model that they incorporate is called exponential smoothing. And it's a great model to forecast out data. Once you add this in, it's going to create, it'll forecast out those particular number of periods, and it will wrap it with a confidence interval. So kind of your upper and lower bounds based on some measure of confidence. 95 is, I think, the default. And I think you can even adjust that up to 99 or 80 or whatever you want. So it creates that forecast, and you can also change the number of periods you want it to forecast out. So if I wanted to look at just the next 6 periods, I can make that adjustment and it will forecast out those 6 periods in our view. Another great thing I love about the forecast option, again, going back to people that maybe not so statistical heavy or savvy, what it will do if your model is not accurate enough to calculate out a very good forecast, it's going to represent your data with just an average line with a 95% confidence over it. So you'll see from your starting point, all the forecast periods out, it'll just be a straight line. And that's a visual cue to just say, hey, like there's not enough data here to calculate out something significant. So we're just going to say it's probably going to be what it has been on average. So from there, you have the option to kind of go in and maybe we're looking at a year and we're trying to forecast out some years in our data. Maybe we need to drop the level of granularity to month or week to get a good forecast. So it can really start to pick up on some of that seasonality and those trends. So again, forecasting is a great way to continually to add context within your view. The last model I'll touch on is clusters. And underneath the hood in Tableau, they use a model called K-means. It's a clustering model that's used in the industry all the time. And what this will do is it's going to create clusters within your data. So going back to the scatter plot example I keep bringing up, if I wanted to figure out, maybe I wanted to decide on how my customers kind of falling in line, or maybe I want to create some sort of relationships to customers so I can apply some sort of marketing technique to them. This would be a great way to do it. You can simply add in clusters into a scatter plot, and it's going to cluster out all of those customers on your scatter plot with this model, the K-means model. You can define how many clusters you want to be represented in your data by simply right-clicking on the model once it's in the view, and you can then change those options underneath the calculation. So you can change it to maybe 2 clusters or 3 or 4, however many. And then there it will visually display those clusters in the view. If you want to get even more into the weeds with statistics, again, Tableau makes it really easy. We can make an external, it's called an external analytics connection, but we can connect directly to R or Python to pass data from Tableau into one of these services where it will process it and return the results. This is how you would connect to that. And I think I took the screenshot and an older version of Tableau. If you're on the latest, I think these are slightly different, but it's still, I think, the same language. You'll just see a little bit different options in here. So you would click Help and then go to Settings and Performance. There's an option that says Manage Analytics Extension Connection. And then from there, you can connect to an R server or something in Python to make that connection and pass the data to that other service where it will process it. What I love about this is and I'll use R as an example. That's the one I use more often than not. So if I pass something from Tableau into R and it processes it, let's say I'm doing some sort of regression. Once I have it processed in R, I can then return the coefficients and the p-values directly into Tableau. And now I can use them as measures on their own. So if I was creating some sort of predictive model, now I have access to all the coefficients that would be involved in that. And I can use them as measures to do calculations within Tableau and visualize what that would look like. So again, another really, really powerful way to incorporate some of those other more advanced analytics into your tools. All right, so my fifth layer, I've toggled on. So we have statistics now reading into our view. We're looking at our line chart. I've added in a trend line, and I've also added in a forecast. So we can see that trend line, it's kind of going, that bottom left up to the top right, and we see now it has a forecast with some sort of confidence interval around it. Now the last layer is theme, and theme for me, personally, I think Tableau does a fantastic job of all the layers we just covered. Makes it really easy to connect to all kinds of different data from different data sources. Anyone can create a mark type. Even adding aesthetics is pretty easy. You can just drop things onto the marks card. Filtering, super easy. Even adding these complex statistical models, they've made pretty easy. However, I think that they're really lacking in this area. Adding just basic design into your dashboards, Tableau just doesn't incorporate that within the software. So we kind of have to lean on some other softwares if we want to incorporate simple design elements like drop shadowing, or maybe it's just adding some sort of curvature to your buttons and charts or view, the architecture around your view. So there are some other tools out there that I lean on personally, which would be these two. The one I typically find myself in more often than not is Figma. That's the icon to the left in this chart. Figma is a great design tool where you can start wireframing and creating design elements for your tools. And it's really easy to use. It's also free. So anyone can go to figma.com and create an account and start working in it today for free. So it's a great way to start getting into the design world. On the other hand, we have things like Adobe XD. It's another graphic design tool that works very similar to Figma. However, it's a paid subscription service. With that said, though, it also comes with some other really cool Adobe Creative Suite tools, like things like Photoshop. So if you went that route, it is a paid service, but you have access to more tools that will give you a little bit more ability, more bang for your buck, if you will. So Adobe XD is another tool that I personally like and would recommend. What you can do then is go into these tools, create your design elements, export them out as an image, and incorporate them within Tableau, either using a custom shape or mapping that some sort of image with an image object. You can do all of that, from Figma, export it out, incorporate it in Tableau. And I'll toggle on the theme for my workbook here. So we can see it all kind of come to life. I've wrapped it with some architecture. So you can see I've added some drop shadowing, which just gives it a little depth. I've added in things like headers, maybe some imagery, incorporating, who I am or some sort of commenting. I've turned on labels for my toggles, so we can see there's a clear on and off now. I've also labeled all of those elements or each one of those layers, so we can see theme at the top, statistics, and it works its way down. So now we can kind of see everything come to life. The most important thing I'll say about the theme layer is if you're having trouble driving adoption with your tools, try incorporating some of these design elements. You'd be really surprised how just adding in a simple theme will add credibility to your tools and drive that adoption within your organization of them. To kind of give you an example, if I was walking around a car lot and I saw an old rusty car and right next to it, I saw a Ferrari. Probably going to go and check out the Ferrari, right? And just look through it. It's super cool. I might stay away from the rusty car. So that's just kind of an example. That's just the way we're built as humans. We're going to be driven towards something that, you know, looks a little better, kind of gives it that credibility. Then again, if you're the analyst using this report, you know, if you're driving around in the rusty car and no one knows about it, you know, that's fantastic. Just keep doing what you're doing. You don't need to wrap something or drive a Ferrari just to make yourself feel better. It's not going to give any credibility to your audience. Then, you know, don't incorporate a theme. It's probably not worth your time. But if you're, you know, deploying this out to maybe like a C-suite or our mid-level manager, you're going to want to incorporate some of these design elements because it's really going to drive adoption of your tool. We'll jump into this exercise. I do want to just briefly pull this up. I call it taking away the layers, but I did create this workbook for everyone as kind of like a or a resource that you can use after this presentation to keep up with it. But basically, it's the thing that we've been building as we've gone through the presentation. Here I have the line chart we've been talking through. And from this tool, you can turn off these layers. So you can see how they're all working. So for instance, if I turn off aesthetics, you'll see some cool things happen here where we can kind of start tying in those other layers. So by turning off aesthetics, now I've lost color. And without color, I cannot incorporate a forecast. Forecast needs a separate color in the view to represent what's predicted versus what is not, versus your actuals. So you can see if I toggle that layer off, it goes away. If I toggle off my filters now, you'll see now I've lost the ability, I've lost that context that I'm given to the user to allow them to kind of dive in and look at the different stocks. Now they're just stuck with one. So that's kind of how that one would work. You know, if I toggle off statistics, we'll lose that trend line and we're just left with a line chart. This still has, you know, this is still a great resource if we're looking at our data, but, you know, we kind of lose that predictive modeling that we've incorporated. If I toggle off the theme, you can see how just toggling off that simple theme, we lose a lot of that design elements and we kind of lose a little bit of credibility of the tool. If I just presented my users with this, it definitely doesn't look and present itself as better as something like this would. So feel free, if one of you guys could post this in the chat, feel free to go through it, kind of click through those different layers and you can kind of see how they'll all come together. We'll go back to our slideshow. And there are some resources out there that I just want to push real quick. One of them being Tableau Public. Tableau Public is a fantastic resource. If you do not have one, get one today. It's not just for building a portfolio. So even when I started, I was really shy about sharing any of my work. I didn't want anyone to judge me. I didn't want anyone to look at what I've done. But you'd be surprised, like the data community is just such a good community. Like no one's gonna like hate on you for publishing something. Typically what I've found, at least in my experience, is often more often than not, you'll get a lot of positive feedback. You'll also get some really good criticism. Constructive criticism is great to build up your skills, right? Everyone needs it. So don't shy away from it. It's definitely worth your time. Another great thing I love about Tableau Public that's often overlooked, really Tableau Public's like the world's largest data repository, right? Like people have been publishing stuff to Tableau Public. I think they published some stat that said there's over 2 million workbooks. Maybe it's more than that, I'm not sure. But what I'm trying to say is you can go in here and search for any topic that you're interested in. Let's say it's comic books. If you're looking for data on comic books, search Tableau Public. I guarantee you'll find a workbook out there that's connected to some data that has comic books or that's about comic books. So this is a great way to connect with other authors. Maybe they share a similar interest that you do. You can connect with them. Maybe you want to use their data. Definitely reach out. I'm sure they're happy to share that stuff. And maybe there's even opportunity to collab with them on something that you both share an interest on. So just a great way to connect with the community as well. I'll briefly touch on these. We offer resources within Playfair Data. We do a virtual flagship training. It's a 4-day course. We're kicking off one this fall. I believe it's in September-ish time period. But it's virtual. You sign up for it. You can attend that training. We also have our Play for Data blog. We blog all the time. We just published one on this Tuesday. I think we have over 200 blogs on our website now. So if you're stuck on something or trying to learn something, go to our blog, check us out. I guarantee we've run into that same thing. We figured it out and blogged about it. So definitely give it a chance. We also offer Play for Data TV. It's a viewing live stream service. So you would have access to over 24 plus hours of recorded content where we're walking you through these video tutorials and walking you through step-by-step on how to create something. So check that out. And lastly, we do offer consulting. So if you're interested in working with us or teaming up with our team, reach out. We'll work together to see if that's a mutual fit for both parties. So I'm happy to help out or jump in and start working with you guys out there. Some other resources in the community that I just absolutely love. One of them is the Flairlich Twins blog. They blog all the time and I love their content. One thing I love about it is they often post these templates where, say you wanted to create some really cool like sunburst chart. You can go to their site or their blog and download that template. They typically provide an Excel sheet where you can then just plug in your own data and it will populate out that really cool chart for you. So I just love what they're doing in the community. It's great. Another one that I follow is, it's called the Best of Tableau Web, and they publish this once a month. But there's bloggers, I think Andy Cockreeve and Mark, I'm blanking on his last name. They do this blog and they'll go through and they've combed through hundreds of different blogs and they're grabbing out some of the best content for that month and consolidating it all right here. So a lot of really cool, innovative things will come through this blog that you can check out, and then you can click right to it and see the content. So it's a great resource out there. The next one is they do a weekly data fan blog. So they'll blog weekly. It's very similar. They'll kind of post out, different, maybe it's vizzes that have come out that week or different blogs, different community events that are happening. They'll publish what tugs are upcoming. So another great newsletter or kind of blog to subscribe to. And then last, I'll touch on this again, just going back to the Best of Web. The Best of Tableau Web, they have published, Andy Cockreeve in his Tableau Public, he has this out there, but it's every blog that they're subscribed to where they'll look at the content. So if you're a blogger, try to get your blog up on this view, definitely reach out to them or see if they're tracking you. Another thing is you can go here and directly click on any of these. So maybe you can start putting some faces to names. This person, you're familiar with who they are. Maybe you didn't even know what blog they have, or if they're blogging at all. So another great resource to kind of go through, dive in and see what the community is doing out there. But that's all the content I had today. So I really want to thank you guys again for joining. Like I said in the beginning, I know your time is very valuable. So hopefully you've taken some value out of this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to, I'll answer them now live, but if you want to reach out, here's some of my contact information. So my email, my Twitter handle is Visual Lang, and then my LinkedIn, that's where I'm probably most active on social media. It's just a LinkedIn domain, and then it's Ethan-Lang, and then a /. But happy to answer any questions now, if there are any. I'll stop sharing there. Any questions? If not, we can open it up to networking. Cool. I'll turn it back over to Abe. Thanks. Yeah, I see Will clapping. Appreciate that.
Yeah, wow. You did such a good job explaining, like no one else could think of anything to add.
Yeah, you guys are probably just done hearing me talk. It's all good. I get it. I totally get it.
I have nothing to reshare on my screen, but one of the last links I dropped is to vote for us or one of us for the Tableau Awards. I think that's what it is, Ethan, right?
Yeah, the Tableau Vizies, they're out. There's a, you guys can go and take a survey. It's definitely, I definitely recommend it. So some of the questions that you'll see in there would be, you know, who's most active in the community, who's helping out the community. There's the best tug in there. So if you guys want to drop us in that, that'd be awesome. Not going to force your hand though. Probably after this presentation, you're like, no way. But yeah, definitely go there, take it. It's a great thing that the community puts on, and I think they present all that stuff during the conference. So yeah, definitely, if you guys can take that, it's awesome.
Hey, Kevin Flurlage, do you have anything to say about the Vizies, as we almost had to rename them the Flurlage Awards when you and Ken like swept the floor? Do you have any strong opinions or a Vizzy to share?
Well, since you put me on the spot, Mr. Strauss, awesome event. I mean, I remember in 2018, I won 2 of them, and I was like, and I'd been using Tableau for like 8 months or something. So it was a very encouraging thing. And so yeah, I vote for them, and the more people that vote, the more voices we have out there. You know, because I mean, it shouldn't be just, you know, these, like last year, I think somebody won 4 of them. It's like, I'd love to see, you know, that spread out and more people get to win those. So yes, it's awesome. Thanks for putting me on the spot. I had no idea what I was going to say there. So anyways, in this first time I've joined this group, I am not a veteran, but thought your presentation was awesome, Ethan. Very familiar with your work. I'll give another shout out to Playfair Data, because it's probably, I mean, there's one couple some twins website that's pretty decent, but there's Playfair Data is probably my favorite website. Reference it all the time for lots of cool tricks, and you're right. If you have a problem, you can probably find a solution on Playfair. So anyways.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I have nothing else to present unless someone else has questions, but appreciate everyone coming out.